The U.S. President Trump is a Mandela Effect. In the first timeline, before all these shifts started happening, someone far more destructive and dangerous was elected. It means the goofy Egyptian pharaoh boy before him was a Mandela Effect as well. It means George Bush Jr., the idiot Bush, is a Mandela Effect because he was a total idiot. It means Dan Quayle, who was the vice president for the first of the George Bush, was a Mandela Effect. The first of the George Bush was a CIA operative. Big person in the CIA. A lot of people think he is responsible for JFK. Now, I know this conspiracy shit, I don't care. I'm just saying some people think it's... The point is that if there were some powerful cabal in the world controlling everything, in this time where they are, this mythical group, so afraid because everything's falling apart, they would be putting more and more effective leaders in place. What we see is Dan Quayle and George Bush the idiot, and not the dangerous father George Bush, and most recently Donald Trump the clown, because this guy can't be taken serious about anything. It's like watching reality TV to watch a presidential speech. This guy's a moron. And his stupid orange hair and all of his ugly sexual escapades and so on. He's comedy. This is, if back in the 70s, 60s say, people had dared to make fun of the president, they would have made someone like him. Let's say after Nixon, when everybody was doubtful of the president and so on, where the president role lost a lot of respect, if they made a comedy, probably a British comedy, because Brits do really stupid comedy. Donald Trump is a Brit comedy version of the president. You can't take him seriously. There's nothing about this guy that's scary. I mean, really, the only scary thing is he's in a position of power, and his stupid could affect a lot of people. Yeah. But he cares a lot about money and staying rich, so he's not likely to do anything to destroy the economic system and ruin everybody, because he wants to stay rich. So the only scary thing about Donald is that he's in this role. But he is, there was a very goofy man, Borat, claimed to be from a small third world Europe, kind of Eastern Europe country, and went around and made a buffoon of himself, wearing really stupid bikinis on the beach and asking really embarrassing questions of public figures. Borat and Donald Trump are the same character. One from an extremely poor background, sort of Beverly Hillbillies character, the other from a very rich background, but they're the same type of really low-level comedy. He's a joke. And I know that people have expressed fear that a person who is so racist and so sexist and so full of hate could destroy the world or lead it to destroy itself. But he's a comedy. Everything about him is comedy. I don't just say he's a joke because that sounds like I'm making fun of him. I'm not. I'm acknowledging everything about this guy and saying he's comedy. Watch one of his YouTube videos. Watch the stupid stuff he says. I see him on public television saying how he wants to fuck his own daughter and, practically drooling while he's saying it. Everything about this boy's comedy, not scary. He's a children's Disney villain. And in that, he is a Mandela Effect. Because, again, I come back to the theory that people are scared of. There's a group of Swiss bankers or Jews or Illuminati or aliens or reptiles from the fourth dimension or whatever your conspiracy, du jour is, controlling the world and taking over and turning us all into slaves. And they have this powerful plan, and all this stuff is working together because they're so brilliant. These supposedly brilliant, supposed conspirators wouldn't have let George Bush Jr. take office. That guy was a moron. would never have let Dan Quayle have his misspelling of potato adventure on national television. Jimmy Carter, he was a wonderful guy, I suppose. I mean, for president standards. Not actually, but by presidential standards. He was a good guy. Ronald Reagan was a mediocre actor whose biggest starring role was in very low-budget comedies alongside a monkey. Right? Ronald Reagan, I don't know. Dan Quayle, George Bush, the whole lot of them. They're buffoons getting sillier every year. The guy who looks like Akhenaten, who was the last president, whatever his name was. It doesn't matter because he was a buffoon too, but he's always standing up there looking pretty and shouting about, it's change, it's all change, we're going to change, and nothing's changed. The U.S. is the same place it was. And I have heard people saying this from England about their leaders. I have heard people saying this from Australia about their leaders, that they have these clowns saying really stupid stuff, and you can't take them seriously. I heard one guy looking at a group of world leaders and say, look at these bozos. Would you trust any one of them to walk your dog? And the answer is clearly no, so why would you vote for them? What I want to suggest to you is if there were a dark cabal, there would be people of great power who are immensely manipulative, who you would believe in totally and think, oh, they're going to save us, as they lead you like a pig to slaughter. And what we're seeing all over the world is buffoons in office. I mean, not just sort of, well, maybe somebody made a mistake, but in countries all over the world, we're seeing clowns, we're seeing caricatures. It's silly. I mean, we're seeing Monty Python presidents all over the world. And if you were to just look at this from the outside, you'd be baffled. What's wrong with people that they are electing people who sound like the Monty Python folks? You could see Trump creating the Ministry of Silly Walks and funding it. Probably you'd have to be one of the British buffoons to do that, but these buffoons are all over the place. And I want to suggest to you that this is on purpose. Because in the Mandela Effect, there is a movement from fear to joy. I have said this before, but I'll make it very explicit here. Everything that comes from fear is bad. Fear is the root of all shadow in your world, all anger, all violence, all greed, all jealousy. All this stuff comes from fear. Every destructive thing in your world comes from fear. And what comes from joy is curiosity and fascination and passion and love and excitement and enthusiasm. Joy causes things to expand and fear shuts them down. And people have been so afraid about their leaders, it wasn't enough to put a nice leader in there, because people would say, we just haven't discovered their dark stuff yet. Right? So we get this last U.S. election between a woman who apparently sees fairies. She's always looking up all around, oh, what's that? Oh, that. I mean, she just looks like a complete nutter. She's a cartoon character. Yeah, she's probably a very dark and ugly cartoon character, but her presentation in the world is that of a cartoon character. And this playboy with the tangerine hair and all the money in the world, almost literally, and, fondling his daughter on national television, and he's a cartoon character, and so is she. And so you had a choice if you voted in the U.S. between one of two cartoon characters. You had sort of Smurfette on LSD and Goofy. You were voting between these two. Those were your only choices. If there were a dark cabal in the world, they would not have picked those two. And so, if we assume that there is some sort of group trying to lead the world down a dark path, they have been trumped. Right? I've played it, well, the Mandela Effect has played a trump card on them. And all of their efforts are being wasted because their people all over the world are morons. This movement from fear to joy has pushed past just, be happy. notice the good things, into silliness. Because you look at these people and you either have to cry at their incompetence or just laugh. Because if you've ever watched a clown show in a circus, big circus tent and lots of sweaty people and sawdust on the floors. These are clowns in their big shoes tripping all over and bumping into one another. It's I don't want to say ridiculous because I don't want you to ridicule, but it is immensely silly. It has taken the scariest, most powerful people in the world and made them into caricatures of themselves, or cartoon characters. I was asking 3 questions a couple days ago, because it looks like, now I'm not going to claim this is true, I'm just saying, looking at the videos and all the evidence, it looks like the moon landings were faked. And it looks like the ISS is fake, and it's not even subtle. Some of the things are so egregiously bad you'd have to be a child to believe that the ISS, the International Space Station, is real. So my 3rd question was, why are they, if they're faking these things, doing it so badly? Why are the mistakes they're making in these ISS videos so immensely obvious? Right, there's a 11-second or 20-second delay between the ground and the space station. And yet we see this guy on the space station playing a guitar and singing along with a choir on the ground. Now, if you've ever tried to sing with someone on Skype, you know that it just doesn't work. The delay makes your timing all wrong, even if it's only a couple seconds. I've seen these people where someone on the ground will say something silly, and you'll see them immediately break into a smile. And then they stare at the ceiling for 11 seconds or 20 seconds or whatever the magic number of the day is, because it changes. Why it changes, I don't know, but it changes. And then they'll say, haha, that's a good thing. That's a good joke. Right? But you saw them smile as soon as the person said it, and they just waited X number of seconds to respond. I mean, some of this stuff is so clumsily faked, it looks like a high school production. Admittedly, a more high-budget high school production, but it's just silly. To see these guys spacewalking on the outside of this as if they're at great risk. And, forgetting to plug in something in their suit, or seeing little bubbles rising up in the water behind them. There was one of the astronauts on the space station doing a spacewalk whose suit flooded. This guy almost drowned. His suit just suddenly filled up with water, and his mask filled up, and they rushed to bring him in and get his suit off. And they couldn't explain why, being in space, his suit suddenly flooded. If your suit pops a hole in space, it doesn't fill with water, it empties. And seeing that, and seeing the little bubbles rising up in the water behind them as they're supposedly in space, it's just really weird. It's very low quality fakes. But if you look at the answer to that question, why are they faking it so badly, under this same envelope of things that were scary or threatening or awkward, things that made you feel weak and powerless as suddenly being made to be silly. You can see a guy in space who gets a hole in his suit and it fills up with water. That's just silly. Religion. I understand that changes are happening to holy books all over the world, and the people who are devout are saying, no, our book hasn't changed. It's always talked about this, girl getting her tits groped by these guys and loving it because they had dicks the size of horses and they came like donkeys, or vice versa. It's always said that, and we thought it was the word of God. I mean, that's just silly. Don't put wine into bottles because the bottles will break. It's become preposterously silly. If you believe in God, you have to believe, the Christian God, you have to believe in the Bible. And the Bible talks about unicorns and manticores and dragons and so on. You have to believe in unicorns and fairies to be a Christian. And yeah, people are saying, oh no, they're really talking about rhinoceroses. or some nonsense like that. They're trying to find a way to explain it. Why Jesus is suddenly coming out in favor of slavery. If you're a slave, you need to submit and be a good slave, even if they beat you and treat you badly. Why? Why is Jesus suddenly saying slavery is good and you should be a slave and do what you're told? I mean, nobody in the right mind thinks slavery is a good thing. Right? There are some freaks out there who probably should be removed from the population. And there are people who play with it for a weekend. I'll be, a slave for my girlfriend this weekend and she'll do it for me next weekend kind of thing. But nobody with any sanity at all thinks slavery is a good thing. And yet, Jesus is supposedly, I've read it, he is now saying, oh, this is a good thing, slavery, and you should be happy to be a slave. And religion has become as preposterous as the ISS and the little bubbles rising up behind them in space and such, because these guys are clearly underwater. Politics, religion, the North Pole magically disappearing, even though a few years ago we're told we're all going to die because the North Pole's melting, and then it just disappears and the water levels haven't changed anywhere in the world. Oh my God, global warming, climate change, it's so terrifying, we're all going to die. And yet, all the thermometers that they've built for this have shown no change in temperature over the last few years. And even though the North Pole is completely gone, you had a warm enough swimsuit, you could just swim across there. Polar bears are freaking out. Santa Claus has moved to Florida. I mean, the North Pole's gone. And not a tiny bit of Florida is underwater. None of the islands in the Pacific are underwater. Nothing's changed. And if it were, 5% less of the pole, you could still be afraid. Possibly. But when it's 100% gone, and these people said, well, if it's gone, we're all going to die. It's 100% gone and nothing has happened. The whole global warming thing suddenly looks silly. A lot of the stuff that's scary, and I predict you're going to see this with cancer, with AIDS, with a lot of things that have been terrifying for a long time to people. They're going to suddenly start becoming silly. And I know that's maybe a little awkward for someone to consider that AIDS or cancer, which are really scary things, might become silly. But the government controlling your life and the head of the CIA becoming president and the head of the KGB being president in Russia and all this stuff, that's become silly. We've got cartoon characters in office. And I suggest to you that you're going to see it with everything that has scared you. The big super volcano under Yellowstone that could supposedly erupt and destroy us all. The mysterious Planet X Nibiru, which is going to they think is going to crash into the world and wipe out humanity in the next few years. Or maybe tomorrow, depending on who you talk to. It's going to be silly. And it's going to happen with everything of power that would lead you to fear, because fear leads to all of the stuff of the darkness. And joy leads to the light. And as these scary things become more and more silly, even if you spent your whole life enslaved to religion or afraid of politics or, enslaved, say, by science, and the scientists know everything, you have to believe it because scientists said it. Eventually, probably very soon, the whole ISS is going to come out as a hoax. And people are just going to be shocked and at first offended, but afterwards they're going to be laughing. There's going to be all kinds of jokes. Some of these late-night television talk show hosts joking about how the International Space Station's really in a pool in Russia or under the desert in Arizona or this kind of thing. And it's going to be the stuff of silliness, of jokes. And then when a scientist said, it absolutely has to be this because science says, you look at them and say, yeah, but last year 2 years ago, you told us global warming was going to destroy it. And now now the North Pole's gone and we ain't dead. Or, you said the ISS was the most important scientific endeavor in the history of humanity. And it was in a swimming pool in Russia. And you're going to look at these things and you're going to find it very difficult to be afraid. This is what Mandela is doing for you. Not Nelson Mandela. This is what the Mandela Effect is doing for you. It's taken all of these things out of the hands of fear and putting them into the hands of joy. And because silliness is beyond joy, well, it's actually going beyond, because you've been so far on the fear side, it's going so far in the other direction to silly and preposterous and joking. And all of these big, scary, horrible things are suddenly going to become the subject of jokes. The unicorns and fairies in the Bible. All of this is just going to change until the control structures that have kept you in fear, the religion that says you will go to hell if you don't do what we say, the governments that say we'll drag you off to Guantanamo if you don't do what we say, the banks that say we're going to kick you out of your home and take everything you own if you don't do what we say, all of these institutions of slavery, of control, all these things that have caused you fear, everything you have been afraid of in your life is moving towards silly, and it must, because you must move from a place of being grounded in fear to a place of being grounded in joy.